Hello everyone and welcome to the Reddit Railway. My name is Victor and I'll be your driver. Today's destination is r/RPGHorrorStories, so all aboard! The cast consists of me, the Dungeon Master, Dave my roommate, Annie, Dave's girlfriend, Rich, a friend of mine and Dave's, and Trish, the problem player. So, back in 2013 I was at university and we were playing Dungeons & Dragons 3.5e. For context, I'm not really the typical nerd archetype. I'm fairly tall and muscular. Aside from being interested in RPGs, science, maths, nerdy movies and video games, I also play on the university's rugby team. I was something of a socialite. I liked to host parties and enjoyed being the center of attention. In short, my highest IRL stat is charisma. My lowest apparently is wisdom. Anyway, after one of these get-togethers, Dave, Annie and I were talking. I suggested we run a D&D game and they were both into it. Neither of them had played before, but Dave informed me that Rich had. Annie said she had a friend who would be super excited to join because she was obsessed with tabletop RPGs. This friend was Trish. I didn't know her before this, which naturally made her something of a wild card, but being the sociable person I was, this didn't bother me at all. When I first met her, all seemed fine. She was lively and excitable. Her and Annie were studying practical effects design. She was very artsy and enthusiastic with a real twinkle in her eye. Little did I realize that twinkle was the barely perceptible short-circuiting of the sanity wires in her brain. I thought she would be a joy to have at the table. If only I had known how deeply obsessed she was with anime-style romances, I'd have quit right then and there. We started the first session and everything was great. Everyone's characters were fun, if a little tropey. This is why I didn't bat an eye at Trish for being the stereotypical bard who hits on every NPC. FYI, her character was a humanoid cat. I respond which NPCs did and didn't reciprocate, prompting Dave's character to try his luck despite having a negative charisma rating. I thought it was all in good fun and so did everyone else. After all, nobody could be insane enough to think imaginary characters interacting automatically meant the DM wants to bone them, right? But I'm getting ahead of myself. There were some red flags. Trish was a little obsessive about anime. She also talked about her perfect man, which often matched the protagonist of a particular show. I don't remember which one. She also described her character as having big innocent doe eyes, playful curves, and swaying hips. She showed up wearing fox ears at one point. I thought she was just really getting into the game and her character. She also had a weird habit of maintaining eye contact with me for an uncomfortably long period of time, but I, with my IRL negative stat in wisdom, didn't put it together that she might have a crush on me. You can probably guess where this is going now. Another red flag I overlooked entirely is she spent almost no time not speaking in character, unlike the rest of us. Now we come to that fateful night. Side note, Dave wasn't there. It was an RP heavy session. The previous one had been combat focused with one of the villains. We had completed a story arc that resulted in liberating a small village. Naturally, this led to a lot of looting and celebrating. This also coincided with the end of our second year exam period. Everyone was having a great time in a low-pressure setting, drinking a decent amount both IRL and in-game. Everyone was smiling and having fun. Trish's character decided that tonight was the night she would get with the burly human bartender NPC she had been flirting with throughout the campaign whenever they had been in this town. This NPC somewhat resembled me, and she had singled him out repeatedly. She succeeded on her seduction role for this poor bartender. I made a joke about them going off to have very scratchy cat sex, for which he will probably need his back bandaged. I attempted to fade to black, but Trish was having none of it. Obviously, she wanted to vicariously play out this encounter. She started describing how her character took off all her clothes while he went to get them drinks. She changed into one of his thin shirts and waited on his bed in a seductive pose while purring sensuously. If all this detail wasn't disturbing enough, she had a creepy, lascivious look on her face. I didn't think much of it as she'd had a couple of drinks by then. I once again tried with, "As he sees you, he shuts the door behind him with a smile." Anyway, back in the bar, Clumperdunk is in the midst of his absurd levitating tankers performance when Trish interrupts, pouting a little this time. She describes how her character stares into his green eyes. My eyes are green. The NPC was described as having blue eyes. She then runs her clawed fingers through his brown hair. Another detail matching me and not the NPC. She is now positively leering at me like I'm a cartoon steak. Rich catches on to this and is just as uncomfortable as I am. Annie is giggling the whole time. I assume this was just nervous laughter. I quite firmly cut to black this time time, but Trish looks oddly satisfied and spends the rest of the session just staring at me while exchanging looks with Annie. At the end, I'm sat there with the three of them finishing drinks before they all head home. Trish asks to use the bathroom and excuses herself. Annie then gets up and declares that she's going home and asks if Rich could walk her across campus. They abruptly leave. I wait for Trish to come out of my bedroom, which has its own ensuite. After 5 minutes, I start wondering if she's taking a dump in there. So I walk in, preparing to knock on the bathroom door, and what do I see but Trish on my bed. Her clothes and underwear are at the foot of it, and what is she wearing? One of my shirts and her fucking fox ears. She was lying in what she apparently thought was a seductive pose. As if this scene wasn't absurd enough, she starts fucking purring at me. The whole time she was giving me this look, which basically amounted to her stuffing as much of her bottom lip under her teeth as possible. She was also blinking rapidly, like she was trying to tell me something in Morse code. Now, Trish isn't an unattractive woman by any means, but I am honestly not into her whatsoever. I do not see her in that way, and I honestly find her a bit weird. Shocking, I know, but what made this whole situation even worse was I had a girlfriend. She and everyone else at the table knew that. By now, I'm standing in the doorway looking like I'd seen a freaking ghost. My brain had turned to mush trying to decipher the incomprehensible spectacle unfolding before me. She then stops deep throwing her chin and says, "If you want your t-shirt back, you'll have to take it off me." I am now legitimately pissed off by her inappropriate behavior. I tell her as calmly as possible that she can keep the shirt, but needs to leave. She scowls at me and hisses at me like a cat. I really wish I was joking about that. Despite how deeply uncomfortable and annoyed I am, the abject absurdity of such an action causes me to burst out laughing. She immediately loses her shit, grabs her clothes in a bundle, and runs outside screaming at me the whole way. I should point out she was only wearing my shirt. She didn't even stop to put her underwear back on, and it seems either Annie or Rich had forgotten something as they were walking back towards the flat at the same time. They saw this 2/3 naked cat fox woman throwing a hyper tantrum over getting rejected. She made an utter spectacle of herself in the quad, which was overlooked by several blocks of halls. There were also other students outside. I would have been mortified if I wasn't stuck between disbelief and uncontrolled mirth. Annie throws her coat over the now hysterically crying Trish. She then starts berating me herself, calling me selfish and ungrateful. She caps it off by saying Trish is better for me than my then girlfriend. I'm in utter shock and disbelief. This is totally out of character for Annie. In the midst of this bizarre and mutually humiliating breakdown, I just gave an apologetic wave and grimace to Rich. I went inside, closed the door, and called Dave. He was just as baffled, shocked, and angry as I was, especially after I described Annie's reaction. He calls her and demands to know what the fuck is going on. As it turns out, Trish and Annie had concocted the events of the evening together. Suddenly, their actions made sense. Annie was meant to distract Rich, allowing Trish to make her move. Dave called me almost 2 hours later and said he and Annie had broken up after a huge fight. I received a text from Rich the next day saying he didn't want to play with us anymore because he couldn't handle the drama. Although I explained to him that Trish would absolutely not be there again, I couldn't really begrudge his decision to leave. I blocked Trish's number after she left, and the only correspondence I had with Annie was a text from her calling me a cunt. I blocked her too. Dave and I never played Dungeons and Dragons together again, though we're still friends to this day. So that's it, Reddit. That's my one and only horror story, and most of it had absolutely nothing to do with the actual game. That tends to be the case with stories like these. The one thing they all seem to have in common is one player having a weird obsession with anime tropes, and Trish was that weird player. Jesus, tap dancing Christ. This girl has more screws loose than a piece of IKEA furniture. And shame on Annie for playing into her delusions. Trying to get your friend together with a bloke who's already seeing someone? Nah, not on. I'm very glad she and Dave broke up. I'm also glad Dave and the OP have remained friends. What about you guys? Have you ever played a tabletop game? If so, sound off down below along with any stories you have about it. Anyway, we've come to the end of our journey. Thank you for traveling on the Reddit Railway, and we hope to see you again soon.